Right now, fierce artillery exchanges and armored advances are happening at the exact same time as high-level diplomacy. Through the spring and summer of 2026, continuous fighting has been matched by a steady stream of direct contact proposals and leader calls aimed at finding an exit ramp. To understand where this leads, we need to look at this three-tiered structure. At the bottom is a ceasefire, which simply stops the shooting. The middle tier is an armistice, which formalizes that military halt. It is only at the top tier, a political settlement, where the underlying dispute is actually resolved. Observers often mistake the bottom tier for the top, but an active negotiating table is not evidence that the minimum acceptable outcomes of warring states have actually converged. Without a political resolution to secure that top tier, a ceasefire is not the beginning of peace. It is merely a tactical pause in a continuous conflict. This brings us to a concept known as strategic theater. States frequently sit down to negotiate in bad faith, knowing their goals are completely incompatible. A negotiating table is a highly effective tool. It allows a government to gather intelligence on an adversary's red lines, while demonstrating enough reasonableness to manage the optics of allied support. More importantly, talks buy crucial time to reconstitute shattered forces and adapt war economies, all while presenting a facade of de-escalation. A genuine peace process is defined exclusively by verifiable structural constraints placed on both militaries. It is not defined by summit language, humanitarian pauses, or leader phone calls. Diplomacy must be analyzed as an active arena of warfare. It operates parallel to the battlefield, serving state interests rather than acting as a separate altruistic process. Between Russia and Ukraine, the conflict rests on a structural deadlock. No amount of creative wording in a treaty can easily erase opposed national security requirements. Moscow's strategic objectives demand durable control over its territorial gains and permanent limits on Ukrainian geopolitical alignment. Kyiv requires the exact opposite: absolute sovereign control over its territory and ironclad protection against any renewed invasion. Their secondary motives run on parallel, but equally conflicted tracks. Russia wants to normalize its gains and secure early sanctions relief, while Ukraine needs to show its partners it is open to peace to prevent allied fatigue. This decision matrix reveals the true dynamic. While process wording can create a temporary bridge on paper, you can see the intersection for an actual resolution remains at zero probability. Yet the utility vectors for both sides peak under the talking column. Negotiations continue indefinitely because the act of talking is highly useful, even when a final resolution is structurally impossible. Because of this deadlock, any signed document lacking strict enforcement mechanisms will simply formalize the aggressor's gains through sheer attrition and fatigue. To separate a manipulative tactical pause from a durable peace, a real settlement requires an architectural blueprint built on 6 specific clauses. This blueprint starts with Clause 1, ceasefire geography and monitoring. As you can see on the map, this requires precise lines of de facto control, active sensor networks, and strict rules for attributing violations. Clause 2 adds security guarantees. The blueprint requires a clear if-then logic gate to dictate exactly what happens when the ceasefire is breached. Relying on a discretionary, politically weak response is not enough. Those agreements fail immediately under pressure. The structure only holds with an automatic response mechanism, backed by named forces and strict deployment timelines. Clause 3 is rearmament. Ukraine maintains a non-negotiable right to rebuild its military and receive foreign weapons after the shooting stops. Without these 3 structural pillars in place, a ceasefire agreement functions merely as a shield. It guarantees the aggressor a safe, uncontested environment to plan their next offensive. Clause 4 addresses territory. There is a critical legal and strategic distinction between accepting de facto temporary control of an area and granting permanent legal recognition of conquered land. This brings us to clauses 5 and 6, shown here via a dynamic sanctions snapback gauge. These clauses govern violation management and the sequencing of economic relief. This creates a sequencing paradox. The party being asked to surrender its military leverage will demand immediate, front-loaded economic relief. Conversely, the defending party knows that once economic leverage is surrendered, the aggressor can cheat on the agreement without facing immediate consequences. Coercive economic pressure is required to force compliance with these clauses. However, if sanctions become a permanent punishment with no negotiated exit strategy, the targeted state has no incentive to compromise, and negotiations fail. A treaty that relies on diplomatic trust rather than automatic, verifiable economic and military triggers is structurally designed to fail. This map illustrates the geopolitical reality. The long-term deterrence burden lands squarely on European nations, not the United States. European states bear the direct exposure to the fallout if a settlement collapses, facing renewed refugee flows, energy crises, and intense military proximity. The United States, operating from a different geographic reality, has a higher tolerance for ambiguity. Washington is driven by a strategic desire to reduce its security commitments in Europe and free up attention for other global theaters. Because of this exposure gap, Europe violently opposes any settlement negotiated above its head. If a poorly constructed treaty collapses, European capitals are left holding the deterrence burden alone. Russia's diplomatic strategy exploits this exact fracture. By deliberately rejecting European approaches while signaling openness to U.S. overtures, Moscow attempts to drive a wedge into the transatlantic alliance. Any peace deal that deliberately excludes the regional actors expected to enforce its terms lacks durability. It is almost certainly a trap. Mapping the diplomatic phase reveals 4 outcomes: a verified ceasefire, a Korean freeze, a tactical pause, or an imposed settlement. The most dangerous is the tactical pause. Without strict enforcement of the 6 clauses, military limits bind the defender while the aggressor consolidates power. The stakes extend far beyond Eastern Europe. Powers like India watch this closely because normalizing the acquisition of territory by force effectively rewrites the rules of global sovereignty. The ongoing diplomacy remains highly meaningful for testing red lines and alliance cohesion, but it must never be blindly interpreted as an end to hostilities. The ultimate proof of a genuine peace settlement is not a handshake. It is the mutual acceptance of costly, verifiable constraints that make the resumption of war structurally impossible.